music, Mountain Dew basketball.
And I'll hand it over to Dr. Jenna.
All right, thanks so much, Veronica. Pleased to be here today and talking about a topic that is really interesting and touches everybody's life and something that I've been interested in for several years. And it's a hard topic to keep on top of because as new technology comes out, it keeps changing. Let me go ahead. I'm going to share my screen. All right, we good to see my screen? Excellent. All right, so just to briefly kind of summarize, I know we just talked about what we're hoping to get out of this presentation, but my hope is just to share a little bit of information with you all today about what we know about kids and technology, the risk and benefits, and then just what I hope are a few practical tips to help guide you and make you feel like you have some tools to help your kids. Because I think one of the most overwhelming parts of this as a parent is just like, what am I supposed to do? And how do I deal with all of these decisions regarding screen time and technology use? I love this meme. And I'm embarrassed to say that my wife had to teach me like what memes are 2 years ago, which is embarrassing when you're like, I'm an expert in technology. But this is, an actual statement from the New York Times that they predicted that TV would fail. No one would sit around looking at screens all day. They were wrong. So they were incredibly wrong because that's what we do now. And we have a whole generation of kids that we call digital natives. So to be a digital native, it's possible that some parents, even in this room, could be a digital native. So digital natives are considered anybody born 1997 and onward. Essentially, these are people who have always had screens in their lives. They've always had access to the internet, and they have grown up where we have this interconnected society. Now, for many parents, they are not quite digital natives, but they've grown up in various times. And so one of the things I always like to ask people is to think about, like, when did you get your first email? When did you get your first phone? When did you get your first smartphone? When did you get your first social media account? And for most of us who are parents, the answers to those questions are much later in life than our children. So I got my first phone when I was 18. I got my first smartphone when I was 27. And I think my first email address somewhere in between there. I got my first social media account when I was 25. And I dare say that my 2- and 4-year-old will surpass me by many, many years in terms of when they get these things. And that's one of the hard things, is because we cannot draw on any of our personal experience in terms of how we navigated these milestones, because they happen so late for us in life. So in some ways, we're playing catch up as parents to try to figure this out. Also, as researchers, we're playing catch up. We've done our best guesses, but honestly, technology has moved very quickly and it's been hard to keep up with. So a lot of the recommendations that we have made about screen time, especially pre-pandemic, were based on our best guesses about human development. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But as the pandemic has changed things, we're rapidly evolving our understanding of what is healthy and unhealthy screen time. So we have our digital natives and we have our digital immigrants. They do have differences in how they approach the world. So digital natives, they tend to get information in infographics, in small tidbits. They like to get information I'll read a title and I'll read a couple of sentences and scroll to the bottom, where digital immigrants tend to like more linear type of information, more holistic information. They might say, I really like having a paper book. I've got my whole bookcase over here because I just like that in my hands. And you're less likely to hear a digital native say those kind of things. So there's just differences in how we approach the world. So going back to my first point, in terms of the recommendations that we have previously made about screen time have all come about due to what we know regarding human development of the brain. And so when you look at this chart, one of the things we know is that in the first 2 years of life, the brain is growing rapidly. And we have all of these connections in our brains. We have more connections in our brains than we have stars in the universe. That kind of blows your mind. And what happens is during those first 2 years, we have neural pruning. And so any connections that we're not using, they're getting taken away. So this is why if you didn't learn a certain language, you will never sound like a native speaker, even if later on you do learn that language. So we know the first 2 years of development are tremendously important for kids. And as you can see, even up until like age 6, it's pretty rapid development. And then after that, it slows off in terms of the development that's happening in the brain. And so a lot of our recommendations early on had to do with knowing that there's this critical time for 2 years, 0 to 2, and then the 2 to 6 years of age. And so what we did is come up with these recommendations based on that. Now, you're probably going to look at these and be like, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible parent because my kid way exceeds these. So I just put pause on the guilt and we're going to talk about that's okay. But why the recommendation was made. So for 18 months and younger, and really it's 2 years and younger, we basically just say no screen time. And the reason for that is it's because it's that really important developmental period. And the exception is doing video chats with family members. That's a fine thing to do. So if you want, grandma and papa, my grandma and papa, they live in Utah. So we FaceTime them all the time. But the reason why that's recommended is because it's interactive. And so if a child makes an expression, they're getting something back from their grandma or their papa, and it's helping them build those connections. If you're sitting a kid who's younger than 2 in front of a screen, they're getting no feedback. So when they smile or giggle or cry, the screen doesn't change. And they need that interaction for those connections, for language, and kind of for social emotional attachment. Now, as kids move from 18 months to 2 years, having screen time that is interactive is really helpful. So you can have very limited amount. You want to, have just be very selective, like 30 minutes to an hour. But if you're sitting down and I'm watching Sesame Street with my daughter, we can talk about it. Oh, Elmo's laughing. Oh, what is the letter A? Let's make the letter A. And it becomes an interactive thing. The problem is when we use TV as a babysitter, which we've all done. But if we start doing that consistently as a habit and a primary strategy, it denies our kids that interactive quality that they need for that brain development. So as you move on 2 to 5, you're supposed to limit it to 1 hour a day. Again, I'm going to show you some numbers here that show that most people aren't abiding by that. And then for 6 years and older, the idea is to place consistent limits on screen time. So they haven't given a prescribed number, but we'll get into that a little bit. But sometimes you'll hear like kids should only have 2 hours of screen time a day if they're 6 or older. But essentially, it's just making sure that it's not excessive. And again, I'll get into what that looks like. So for those of you, and I'm thinking it's all of us, again, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. So my daughter was born a week before the world shut down. So it's such an interesting time to have a child. I experienced what's going on in this chart. So this is the percent of people who their kids and teens spent more than 4 hours a day on electronic devices. So as you can see, prior to COVID, a lot of people were abiding by those recommendations. Since COVID, you can see that a lot of people across all age groups, their kids are experiencing prolonged amounts of screen time. And part of that was just the nature of the pandemic. There was no way around it. And so I think there are a lot of people that are like, oh my gosh, am I hurting my kid or am I doing harm to my kid? Our daycare in the last 8 months has closed down 5 times for at least 5 to 10 days. And there's only so much PTO my wife and I have. And so one of the things that happens is my kids are in front of screens when I have meetings. This was just talked about today at the front of this call. So it's going to happen. So how do we figure out what is healthy and what is not? And that's kind of the guide I'm going to give you. So if your kids have experienced lots of screens, that's okay. That's the nature of where we're at right now. But there's some things you can do to make sure that it's going to be healthy for your kids. And if your kids have gotten into problematic use, I'll give you some tips on how do you curb that and bring it back to maybe what's healthier. I saw
Jenna, yep, there's a chat. It says, does this chart include online school, or is this separate from school where kids are on their screen?
This is a great question. This is separate from school. This is in addition to academic use. Thank you for asking that. Yes, and that's very helpful. I can't see that. I can see a chat come up, but I can't access it. So just let me know when those come in. Okay, so in general, it's not that screen time in and of itself is the problem. It's what's not happening that's the problem. So we've all had scenes like this in our own home or seen this when we're out. Everybody's on their screen. And so there's a lot of things that are missing. So this is what we know about when kids are exposed to excessive amounts of screen time, the negative effects it has on them. So there's a couple of different things we know. So primarily we know with young children, so again, kids who are younger than 2 who are exposed to hours of screen time all the way up to age 6, it really impacts their language and their motor use. So again, they're not having that interactive. When they're on the screen all the time, they're not outside, they're not playing, they're not engaging in both fine and gross motor skills. And so when there's that consistency and we're not having those other things as much of the time, that it becomes a problem. Now, some people believe that, oh, being on a lot of screens will cause ADHD or cause depression. It's not quite that simple, but we do know that kids who have a propensity, a higher risk factors for anxiety and depression, the more they're on screens, the risk goes up even higher. And we do know that we see more symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity in kids who are on screens for long periods of time. And again, it's probably frustrating that I'm not telling you hours because it varies. But again, the main thing is these kids are not getting the recommended amount of outside time they're supposed to have. We want our kids to have at least 30 minutes of outside time every single day, if not more. And so that's the problem. Screens are getting in the way. And so we also know that ongoing screen use outside of what you're doing at school is associated with obesity in children. The thing I'm most worried about, and this especially for those of you who have teenagers or as your kids get older, we know that screens are having a major disruptive effect on kids' sleep. So I read this study, it was a couple months ago, but they had surveyed, I think it was a couple thousand teenagers in the United States, asking them, do you wake up at least once a week to check your phone? And 75% of them said yes. And so, you know, we have a majority of teens saying at least once a week their sleep is disrupted by checking their phone. And this is a problem in a couple of different ways. So their sleep is getting disrupted to do that. But whenever we look at a screen, what happens is light enters our eyes, and it doesn't matter if it's natural light or blue light coming from screens. What happens is that goes in your pituitary and it shuts off this mechanism in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a big fancy word for this, the melatonin making machine. So when light comes in, that gets shut off. And melatonin is what regulates our circadian rhythms and what makes us feel sleepy. So if you're on screens before bed for hours, your melatonin hasn't kicked in. And so you're not going to feel sleepy. Or if you wake up, you're going to shut your melatonin off. So you always want to make sure that you're getting off screens at least 30 minutes before bed, keeping lights low. And where possible, I say keep screens out of the bedroom and keep phones out of the bedroom for both yourself and kids where possible. There's these things they make called alarm clocks, and you don't even have to use your phone. It's kind of cool. Okay, so a couple of things. I read this article the other day and I really liked it because it talked about how like the internet and social media, it's not rat poison. And what they were saying is it's not toxic for everybody. It's more like alcohol. And we know that alcohol is mildly addictive. Alcohol is used for social connection, for celebrations, but alcohol can also be used as an escape. And for a small subset of people, alcohol can cause dependency and depression. And that's the same thing with screens and the internet. We do know that there are a small subset of kids who will experience what we call problematic internet use, where they basically become addicted to their screens. And for some of them, it's addicted to the internet in general. For some, it's social media. So if you're wondering is this my kid? Is your kid obsessed? So always thinking about like, I need to be online, I need to be posting. Is your kid neglecting things in their life like homework, showering, chores, and then lack of control, saying like, we're going to put it away. And all of a sudden they're breaking into your closet and they're grabbing it and they can't stop themselves. So if usage is at this point, you should seek a therapist to get help because that's at the level at which you probably will need professional help. Again, it's a small subset of kids, and your kid might have one of these things, but not all three of these things. And there are some things I'll tell you today that can maybe help get you back on track. But we do know for a small subset of kids, they will become addicted to the internet, gaming, those kind of things. So let's talk specifically about social media, what's helpful about it, and what you want to be thinking about with your kids. Again, another meme I think is hysterical. So hope you enjoy it. Okay. And I'll let you just enjoy also. This is something I found the other day that I really had a good time reading. Okay. So one of the things that we know about social media is it allows for computer mediated communication. And what that means is I am able to be thoughtful, write out exactly what I want to post or what I want to like, I am somebody, and then delete it, edit it, do whatever I need to. And the benefit of that is, so for kids who have a lot of social anxiety, it allows them to still interact with people. But the problem is that it tends to actually heighten their anxiety. So it tends to make them less able to do these connections in real life. So one of the things we know is for kids, it's called the rich get richer hypothesis. For kids who have a lot of friends already, social media seems to be a great thing because they use the internet to connect with those friends. But for kids who tend to be more introverted, who have high rates of social anxiety, oftentimes they will use social media to cope with their symptoms, and it will decrease their amount of in real life interaction. So one of the things we know is you basically want to make sure that your kids are using social media to connect with others and that connection moves into real life. So when it's used to enhance relationships that exist in the real world, social media is great for kids' mental health. When it replaces those relationships, it seems to be terrible for their mental health. Okay, second, we know that kids, especially girls, 11 to 13, this appearance related to social media consciousness is at its height. This is a very, very difficult time for kids. So if you have a kid who's in this time frame or you have a kid who's approaching it, being really thoughtful about having direct conversations about what is on social media is something that is not real, that is curated, that there's filters that are used, and that you start educating your kids. I strongly recommend that parents don't give their kids social media accounts until age 13. I know that Instagram was in the process of developing like a younger platform, and there's been a lot of pushback from the psychological community about that. But kids are really vulnerable at that phase. So if you can wait till age 13, that's great. If you're on this call or you're watching this and you're like, oh my gosh, my 12-year-old has a social media account and I've totally failed them. You haven't, it's okay. It's just making sure you're having these conversations about what's real. Why are you using social media? Are you comparing to people or using it to express yourself? We also know that, so it's good to talk to your kids about like, what are you posting and what is it like for you when people give you likes, and how do you feel when people don't give you likes? Because we know that anxiety and depression can spike in some kids if they don't get a like when they post something. And so have those conversations with your kids. Like, what is your hope? What are you thinking about? So you know why they're posting and how posting impacts them and what they're trying to get out of it. So again, social media we know is good when it enhances real life connections, when it's used for self-expression, and when kids have a good awareness of that what they are seeing is only a small part of somebody's life. I don't know about you, but I don't usually post when I have like a really terrible day and talk about all the things that are falling apart in my life. I save that for my friend group text. Okay, so this is the stuff to help you navigate things with your kids. Now, a lot of times people ask me like, how do I have like teach my kids how to do social media and use technology? I like to use the metaphor of like, if you were teaching your kid to ride a bike or drive a car. So when we do these things, we always start with like training wheels or a learner permit. You always make them have a helmet. You always make them buckle up. And usually somebody is with them when they start using these things to show them how to do it. As they gain proficiency over time, you take away some of those guards so they can now drive by themselves. You take off the training wheels. You always have the safety measures in place. That's essential. So it's the same thing. So when your kid starts on social media, being able to say, let's do this together, being able to talk about privacy, what's private, what's not, how to check privacy settings. I always tell kids that if you post something, would you want your mom to see it, your grandma to see it, your principal to see it, and somebody who's going to hire you in the future to see it? And if the answer is no, don't post it to any of those. It's important for kids to understand, you know, kids have lost scholarships. They've had big consequences because of things they've posted. So starting with your kids, having the conversation about what it means to have a digital presence, that what we post is forever engraved somewhere on the internet, and helping them. The other thing is, don't minimize social media. So there was research done during the pandemic, and a majority of parents said that social media is a waste of time. And a majority of teens said social media is an important aspect of their identity and their life. So you've got two groups of people, one saying, this is so important to me, and the other saying, this is stupid. That's not a great way to approach your kids. And it doesn't matter if you think it's a waste of time or not, they don't. And it's a different part of their life. So validate that this is an important part of how they connect and how they navigate their world. Give them those tools. Try to have just one social media account. We know the research shows the more social media accounts a kid has, the higher risk they have for developing depression. So I tell parents it's okay for them to have a social media account, but do they need an Instagram account and a Snapchat and a TikTok? Like, do you need all of them? And especially for younger kids, have it be one and have them get proficient at it, and have kind of agreements of, this is how I check up on you as you're learning this before you expand out. Also having social media breaks. So just technology breaks in general. So if it's like Friday, as soon as we all get home, we put everything away, and we don't have any technology use, or at the table, we put it all away. I know I've had teens where I've challenged their families to go on a digital fast for a weekend. And like the teens end up like loving this, because they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize like how much lighter I feel. And so being able to do those things and not doing them in a punitive way, doing them as like, we're going to do this as a family. As a reward, we'll go out to this restaurant. As a reward, we'll take a walk, we'll do whatever it is. But these are some of the things that can be helpful for your kids. So again, limit the amount, talk to them, have regular check-ins, especially when they're starting, and just teaching them, again, what you're seeing on there is not necessarily what's real, and asking them like, what have you seen that you think is fake? What do you think is bogus? Teach me about it. Okay, so the other thing I want to say is that social media actually is really good for kids in a lot of different ways. And these are the ways that we know it's important. So we know as kids move from children into adolescent, one of the number one tasks for them is identity development. And so trying to figure out and explore who they are. And social media actually allows kids to do this in a way they never have. So they are able to create TikTok videos, and they're able to, post all kinds of memes and quotes, and learn different things about themselves. So in that way, social media is really, really helpful. We also know that, especially over the pandemic, kids' mental health has taken a real hit. We've also seen an increase of teens searching for mental health resources in community, and that's a wonderful thing. So it's a way to access information. We know for kids from groups that are marginalized, so like LGBTQ kids, that the internet and social media can be really helpful for finding people who are like them, and finding groups, especially if they're living in rural areas. So if you only take one thing away from me today, take this. This is like the most important thing. So we said at the beginning, I'll tell you what's most toxic for kids' mental health. It's passive internet use. So active use is when you are creating things. So you're creating the video where you are FaceTiming, where you are instant messaging somebody and they're instant messaging you back, but you are actively engaging in the creation of content or interacting with somebody. Passive use is when all of a sudden it's been 3 hours and all I've done is watch other people's TikTok videos. Or I've done some, kids don't really do Facebook stalking. That's more of us older people thing, but I've stalked for 4 or 5 hours and I'm never getting back. That's not good for your mental health. So this is, you can make passive use active. So when I was just this last weekend back home in Utah, and I've got 2 16-year-old, a niece and a nephew who are twins, and they're sitting there watching YouTube videos over like again and again and again. I just snuck between them and I'm like, okay, tell me about this. And what would you do if you were creating this? And why are you interested in this? And that's making it active. It's having that conversation with something they're connected to, but it takes them out of just that, like letting things come in, and now they're interacting with it. So that's what you want to do. You want to make sure your kids have some type of active use. And even if you have to put your kids, you have to put Encanto on to make it through that 90-minute meeting that you're in. Afterwards, talk to them about it. Like, what did you like about the movie? What did you think about this character? And make sure that you're interacting with them. So in general, get rid of the idea that hours of screen time matter, and instead you'll make decisions based on the child. So we know individual differences with kids and just knowing your kid, the context and the content. So again, the context is we want it to be as much active use as possible. And if you think about a playground, certain playgrounds like you go to and you're like, there's one slide. But there's these other complex playgrounds. You want your kids to have like a good digital playground. And then the content. So again, maybe your kid watching Sesame Street, they're getting something a little bit more educational than I can't even think of something that's just bogus right now, but you get the idea. Okay, so instead of focusing on the hours, these are the pillars. If these are in place, no matter how old your kids are, you don't have to worry about screen time. If these are not in place, then you need to evaluate if screen time is the reason that these are getting disrupted. Okay, so the first is required amount of sleep. If you haven't already, you should, if you don't know this, think about like Googling it. Look at the American Academy of Pediatrics or talk to your pediatrician. Most people don't know how much sleep kids should get. I primarily work with teenagers, and most parents are shocked when I tell them that teenagers need 9 to 11 hours of sleep, because the majority of them are not getting anywhere close to that. And young kids need a ton of sleep. So make sure that your kids are getting the right amount of sleep, that they're getting good nutrition, so that they're eating those 3 meals a day with snacks in between, and also hydration. Water is really important. I always push that. Most of our kids are dehydrated out here, and that really impacts their emotion regulation abilities. Making sure they're getting at least 30 minutes of outside physical activity time. No, it's really hard in the winter, but even then, that's really, really important that they're having that time to get outside. And again, physical activity is good in the house, but it's even better outside. And we know that at least 30 minutes of sunlight, no matter who you are, helps you sleep better. That they're spending time in relationships in real life with friends, with family members, and then they're completing responsibilities. So they're doing their chores, they're doing their homework. If these are in place, the screen time will fit in. So if you think about, this was like a lesson when I was like really young at church. They had a jar of sand and some ping pong balls, and they took it all out. And they talked about like the sand is all the stuff you have to do. And if you put that in first, you can't fit in all the essentials. So if you think about that, if I had those 2 jars, if you put these in first, everything that will fit around it, and you don't have to really worry about the screen time as much. So just a few last thoughts, and then we can kind of just get people's reactions. So what I would encourage you to do is, no matter where you're at, I hope that you heard something today that you thought, oh, that's interesting, or that's something maybe we could do a little different, and work on just shaping one thing instead of trying to radically change things. So we actually know with teenagers, when parents remove their social media immediately, like for some teens, it actually can increase suicidal ideation. They're like, you're done with social media. For kids, like that's really cutting off a huge thing for them. So I'm not saying that you can't use technology as a discipline strategy, but don't take it away for months. Don't take it away indefinitely. And if your kids have done nothing wrong, start working on shaping it more slowly. So maybe we get off of screens 15 minutes before bed if we're currently not doing it at all, and then we move it back to 30. Maybe it's, okay, you can have your phone in your room, but we're going to put it across the way on the dresser. Or if you can go the whole week without your phone in your room, you get this reward. You can pick what we're having for dinner 3 days next week. So try to think about ways to shape it. Get fun and get creative. So like I use the example, go on a family digital fast. And thinking about ways to, again, like who can go the longest without like posting on social media, like who can go the longest, or who can post the most positive things this week. Because we know that if you're posting positive content and you're liking positive content, that actually helps reduce depression. But when kids are depressed, they tend to have a tendency to dive into like the deeper, darker content. So just think about what is something we want to cultivate and how can we make it a challenge. I always like to tell people technology is a reward. It's not a privilege. It's not just something like that you get. And so how can kids earn access to that? And again, those pillars are really important. Like, sure, you can play video games all night as long as your homework's done and you're in bed by 10. So you do those 2 things, you get your homework done at 6 and you're in bed by 10 and you eat your dinner, fine. You can do that thing. The other thing you can do is you don't always have to use quantity of time as the reward. And so it could be that instead of like, I'll give you an extra hour, I'll let you download this $2 app that you've wanted to download for a really long time. Or you can pick the movie that we watch tonight, or I will sit with you and I will play this video game. So get creative, because kids love technology in a lot of ways. And so you don't have to just give them more of it, but you can use it as a great reward. Also, think about ways that you can connect with your kids through technology. So again, for me with my littles, it's talking about like, this is my favorite song in Encanto and this is why. And just talking about like the content. For my nieces and nephews, as they get older, again, we were all at dinner when I was visiting my family and they were on their phones. And so I would text my niece and nephew, like, I love you. It's so fun sitting by you. It always makes them giggle. And so just thinking of like those small things that you can do. And then probably the most important, practice what you preach. I constantly have teenagers telling me, like, my parents say I'm on my phone all the time, but they are on their phone way more than me. So be mindful of that, and be mindful of how much technology you're bringing in at one time. So like, are you sitting on the couch looking at your iPad and then checking out your phone? Too many screens, just do one at a time. There's even research to show that the quality of interactions goes down if your phone is on the table, even if you're not looking at it. So don't put your phone on the table at home, put it in the other room. Okay, just make it truly a digital free zone, not just the screen free zone. So you really set the temperature. So thinking about, how do you engage in social media? How often are you on these things? How do you take the breaks? And how are you doing on the pillars? And making sure that you're setting that example for your family. Okay, in general, Common Sense Media is a great resource. Also, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they have a family media use tool. So if you Google family media use plan, it comes up and you can actually sit down with your kids and make a plan together using this website of thinking just through like how much screen time and what are the rules going to be. And the more you can do that in collaboration with your kids, the better. But in general, you can't get rid of screens. You can't get rid of technology. Kids need this for their life, for their relationships, and for their future jobs. So it's important that we don't just be bothered by it, but that we actively engage in it and teach our kids to be these good digital citizens in ways that will enhance their life, rather than just getting and interfering with their mental health. So thanks so much for your time and attention. That's all I have, but I would love to hear people's thoughts or follow-up questions.
Feel free to unmute or type your questions in the chat.
Jenna, I have a question. I have a 10-year-old. My oldest is 10, and you said, waiting until at least 13 for a device. I was planning on waiting until she was like driving. Is there a point where like you actually are causing harm because you're not allowing access?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, and I will clarify, I would wait till age 13 for social media. Smartphones are a little bit different. The average age of getting your kid a smartphone last year was age 11. So I think that kids are going to definitely feel pressure because their peers will have these things. I mean, in general, I do think by preteens going into teen years, even if you choose, so for us, it was, I'm the oldest millennial, I always say in the room. I was born like the first month of when millennials started. And I have 4 older brothers who are all Xers. So in our generation, it was the families who didn't have TV in their house. And so even if you choose to be like, I'm not going to give my kid a smartphone, I'm not going to let my kid be on social media, there is a due diligence. You still need to teach them about what it is and why you're not doing that and how they utilize those things, because they're going to have to do it at school. Kids turn their homework in on online platforms. You can't get away from it. So I do think going into preteens, even if you're choosing to delay, having conversations about what it means to be a good digital citizen, why you're having them wait to do these things. And if you're not going to bring those things in their life, how are they learning those things at school and the proficiency they'll need for jobs?
So I have some comments, and if you can. So basically, I think your presentation was really nice. I mean, I think that's really useful. I mean, I found really valuable this thing about the interaction, you know, like make sure your kids are interacting and so that they develop their brain and all those things. So that was really useful. And the question that I have is not related to that, but it's basically, so I've been looking that even adults, I mean, they're already very used to look at their phones at all the time, you know, and so there are these behaviors that are already very nested in there. So I wanted to ask if there are any type of resources for also for parents to, you know, like be more aware that of that behavior, that conditioning, and try to, you know, get rid of that little by little, because I know that's very hard to do.
That's such a good question. And I'm not thinking of any great resources for like adults right off the top of my head to look at, but I do have a couple of tips that I tell parents and adults to work on, to just become more aware of their own screen time and trying to get it more in check. And so there's a couple of different anchors that I always tell people to start with. Try to go 3 days while you're driving without looking at your phone. Even if you're at a red light, like, and if you need navigation, then stop your car, set the navigation, and then just go, because we all do it, but just try for 3 days. The other challenge I give them is for 1 week, do not look at your phone in the bathroom. There was a time where people just went to the bathroom, and just being present. And so, I mean, those two activities actually are like tremendously calibrating for yourself to realize like, oh my God, I don't know how to just sit and be still without constantly looking at my phone. And if you do those two activities for like a week, you will start having a greater awareness of how often you're grabbing. And then you can integrate it into other things. Okay, now when I'm at the dinner table, I'm not going to do this. When I'm watching TV, I'm not going to look at my phone as well. And you start kind of unplugging the automaticity of it. And so I don't have, like I said, I don't have a good resource, but I would try some of those activities, because we are filling so much of our life in the loose spaces with screen time. And I don't think we realize how plugged in we are and how we lack a sense of presence. And just doing those activities without it will help you reset.
Thanks.
Unless you happen to be the 6 people who don't look at your phones in the car or the bathroom. But I am guilty of those things at times.
I have a question where my oldest is only 7, so we're quite a ways away from a smartphone, but we're thinking about getting him a smart watch. But one of the reasons we want to is so we could track him. You know, back in the days when we were kids, we could just go to our friend's house and it not be a big deal. We'd be home by a certain time. But these days, you kind of want to know where your kids are. But is there any research around like that trust, you know, that lack of trust with the tracking or anything like that? Because my parents never had access to track me.
I know, mine didn't either, thankfully. So I think that's a great question. The research is really emerging on that. And not that I know of in terms of kids that young. I do know that there is research that shows that there is some damage that happens in relationships between parents and teenagers when parents over monitor teen social media accounts in their text messaging. And so I think probably the same thing probably applies. So I think it's okay to say, yes, you're 7. I want to know where you are in the neighborhood. It's okay. And just having those honest conversations, like, this watch will help us know where you are. This is what you can do with this watch. This is, if you did this, this would be reason why we would take it away. But as kids get older, especially as they move into like that 12, 13, and then into teenage years, the major task is kids trying to find the right balance between autonomy and then dependence. And so we want to be there to support our kids, but we want to give them that sense of freedom. So your 7-year-old, I think you're totally fine doing that. I think it's fine to do it for several years, but as they turn 11, 12, maybe start being like, I'm not going to put the GPS on. You need to call me when you get there. And give them the responsibility of showing you where they are, even though it's terrifying as a parent. And again, it's taking off the training wheels, right? So right now it makes sense, but as they get older, make them be responsible for it, and give them that kind of independence.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Yay.
we can.
Sorry, we used Teams at work and I couldn't get my headset hooked onto Zoom. What about, I mean, I'm one of those people who resisted getting a cell phone and all those things. And we do have a 12-year-old kid and she's like the only friend without a phone and no social media and stuff like that. Do you see that as sort of a, I mean, what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think as kids get older, it gets harder. And again, there are some families who will just, that's just going to be what it is. And I think letting your daughter know, like, you're the strong, rational, like the reasoning behind it, and why you're delaying it. But I do think having some type of technology is important for kids, because they use it at school. So I think you're fine right now. And I think just having the open conversation, and I would talk to your daughter, like, when does she think it's time? How would she use it? Why does she want a phone? How would it make her life better? How would it get in the way? And I would make her make a case for it before you go there. But I do think it gets harder and harder to deny kids these resources because so much of their social lives are dependent on them. But there are people who go through it. There are people who never get their kids smartphones and things like that. But unfortunately, you can't get away from having the internet, because that's how they turn on they're turning their assignments, and they're on their Chromebooks all day in school. And I don't think we know if that's good or not for kids. I think we're yet to see.
I think it'd be important to have also a resource that's gonna be like kids appropriate to learn about all the possible deleterious effects that screen time, social media can have on them, so that they're not just taking their parents' word that say they tell them not to do it, but they also have some sort of understanding of why it's probably better not to, engage in social media early or very frequently. So I don't know if also our resources, I mean, to teach kids.
When I would go back to the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, their website is great when it comes to the Family Resource Plan and providing this information. And the reality is, and this is why I try to present it this way, is the research shows there's some real detrimental effects, but there's also some really great benefits of these things. So it's just not, you can't make a case either way of it's this great thing or it's this terrible thing. It's kind of, it's both. It's complicated.
Jenna, what about internet safety? Are there, and like, when is the right time to have training wheels and restrictions or some type of protective element to, use of laptops or whatever systems we're using to limit their access to certain information or materials, versus like when you start to remove those training wheels a bit more?
Yeah, so I'm Googling right now. I'm going to try to find this. I'll throw it in the chat. So Common Sense Media has some really great videos on digital citizenship. So as early as age 10 and 11, I would actually start talking to your kids and being like, I want to talk to you about what it means to be a digital citizen. And when you're online, and these are the things that we think about. So I would do it several years before maybe they have those accounts. But, and kids sometimes are like, oh, I can't believe we're talking about this. But you make them talk about it, and it's like, hey, I just want to talk about this. I want to get your opinion on it. What do you think about it? I know you watch a lot of YouTube videos on my phone. So if you want to keep watching YouTube videos, you have to watch these 3 videos and we're going to talk about them together. And have you ever seen anybody post something that makes you feel weird? Has anybody ever tried to chat you? So by 10, I would have those conversations.
And are there actual like protective systems that you would recommend, or you would prefer that you have the conversation with the child and they kind of intuitively think about whether something makes them feel comfortable or not, and whether that's the right thing to be stepping into?
So I would have the conversation with the kid, but I would also show kids and open up. And most parents, sometimes it's an education for them, go into privacy settings and look and say, these are the things that need to be checked. As a parent, whenever I hand my 4-year-old my phone to watch a Blippi video, I always make sure that autoplay is turned off, because we know that autoplay, the algorithm is sent to like, let's play the next step up video that's salacious or attention grabbing, and then let's do it again and again. And that's how you get to the extremes. And so making sure that those things as a parent, like autoplays are off and different things. That way, if you leave your kid for a few minutes, something just doesn't pop up that gets them further down the rabbit hole. So as your kids get older, go on the privacy settings together. If you already have like kids who are doing this and you're like, oh, I need to like bring it back, have your kids be like, show me the privacy settings. Like, what do you know about Instagram? Like, how does Snapchat work? Does like it really go away? Or what happens if someone takes a screenshot? Tell me about that, and have them educate you about it. In general, it can be very overwhelming. I think parents often are just like, am I doing the right thing? And honestly, we're not even sure what the right thing is. And, you know, in 2 months or in 2 years, a new platform could come out and that changes things. So again, keep the conversations ongoing, make sure that this is a part of what you're talking about with your kids. And then to the extent that you can, keep it active, and just like make sure the pillars are in place. That's the best advice I can give.
Awesome. Do we have any last minute questions, comments, anything for the good of the group?
I also take compliments. Feel free to shower me with those.
You were amazing. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, again, you can find a lot of resources on our YMCA. We all have mental health page. And then we have also recorded this session tonight. So we will be posting the recording on our website. So if you feel the need to share with any of your friends or your family, point them to the direction of our website. Thank you, Dr. Jenna. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to come and talk to all of us about this. And thank all of you for attending our talk tonight.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great